welcome to In Pursuit of Truth and Happiness, Part 2 of Episode 1, The Odyssey in the Lens of Society. Last episode, I finished covering the two different approaches to objective truth as the measurement of how to understand the literature and historical events I will be covering in this podcast by analyzing the objective truth arguments of St. Thomas Aquinas and William of Ockham. I concluded that I will be using the objective methodology of Aquinas rather than Ockham, as Aquinas' understanding of objective truth grounds interpretation in a realist understanding of what we read and see, whereas Ockham introduces an element of subjective truth that creates a philosophical gap between humanity and truth itself. On the previous Odyssey introductory episode, I introduced the work of the Odyssey by breaking down the literary construction of the book, while also introducing the themes addressed by the Odyssey, including but not limited to society, man, husbandhood, fatherhood, sonship, and kingship. Each of these ideas will be tackled as we encounter them, but I will begin with society. Starting with society, we must first recognize that this idea is interdependent on and is defined by the idea of relation. To understand society, therefore, one must understand relation. Yet even with this, defining relation, that is, we find another difficulty. As Mortimer Adler states, relation cannot be defined. It seems impossible to make a statement of what relation is without using the notion of relation in doing so, taken from Adler's Great Ideas book. This is so because what a term is includes the correlation to itself in the definition of itself. In this, we discover that there is a link, a bond, between a term and its correlation. For example, how can we understand what cold feels like if we have never experienced hot? If we take this understanding of relation, we reach the conclusion, firstly, that nothing, at least as far as comparatives go, exists in isolation. For as Aristotle states, things are not great or small absolutely. They are called, rather, as the result of an act of comparison. Secondly, we find an easy segue into society, which is denoted on the most basic level as a collective group of people grouped, presumably for the common good, and individual good as well, but I will not explain this latter point here, but in my coverage of the Republic by Plato. Society, or this collective group of people, that is further marked by hierarchical relations. But as with our example on relation of hot and cold, with the definition of hot being taken from the definition of cold and vice versa, hierarchy becomes reality based on rank and title that is communicated based on how people relate to each other. That is, identity, which speaks to someone's rank in the hierarchy, is taken from how this someone relates to others. For example, parent includes within it the reality of a child and vice versa. Master includes within it the reality of slave. King includes the idea of subjects. Republic includes within it the reality of citizens. Thus, in conclusion, we can see how in society no one really exists in complete isolation. Even in the event where the relational bond is neglected, this last point is an important distinction from relational bonds being non-existent. From this point on, where these ideas of relation and society factor into our understanding of the philosophical message of the Odyssey, they will be discussed and cross-referenced with what is going on with the story. Moving back to the story, as stated previously, the bulk of the Odyssey is not about Odysseus' journey overseas, but rather Odysseus is eliminating the suitors trying to woo his wife and queen Penelope. Ultimately, and with the help of Athena, some servants, Telemachus, Odysseus kills the suitors and reclaims his kingdom. Yet we must ask ourselves why exactly the suitors were given the death penalty. The answer lay in the notions of relation and society as touched upon earlier. Odysseus is king and has been absent for a decade before the suitors, the best men of Ithaca and other locales nearby, attempt to court Penelope. Yet it is only when Odysseus does not return in the aftermath of the Trojan War, presumed dead by the suitors, that the suitors make their attempt to court Penelope. The implication is clear. The suitors are making a power grab. Several points reinforce this interpretation. Firstly, the suitors are described, at least the chief suitors named, as part of the better part of society, the rich, which means the suitors could most likely marry whomever they wish. And not once do the suitors give up in courting Penelope. Secondly, the suitors plot to kill Telemachus. It is not guaranteed that Telemachus would have been king upon the occasion of Odysseus' death, but even if inept, ineffective, lost in the transition from boyhood to manhood, Telemachus was the nominal head of the household until Odysseus returned. Not that Penelope is weak, but Telemachus stands in some kind of way between Penelope and the suitors. Admittedly, Telemachus might have been killed if not for Athena. The role of divinity in the Odyssey will be explored later. Lastly, when Odysseus was about to take his vengeance on the suitors, the bulk of the suitors throw one of the two chief suitors, Antinous, under the bus by saying he only desired to marry Penelope because he wanted to be the chief man of Ithaca. These 3 points direct us to the conclusion that the Odyssey is mainly about the impact that war has on society in terms of destabilizing society by harming the relations that make up society and are supposed to be the harmonious links and bonds that allow society to move as a single body, prosperous in or moving towards as by virtue. For virtue is what fully actualizes the human being, a point we will discuss in future works such as Plato's Republic, and more besides, but a point we also encountered in the Iliad. War, or Odysseus going off to war, left his place as father, husband, and king, absent from his home. As a result, Penelope, the wife, and Telemachus, the son, find themselves lost. Odysseus' mother dies of grief while his father lingers in sorrow. Penelope has no idea if she is still a wife or a widow, and the suitors lastly see a vacuum opened at the top of Ithaca's social ladder that ambition and avarice pull them, the suitors, toward. That one of them may fill it. It is no different than the siren's call to death that Odysseus himself experiences. It is no wonder that Dante sees the siren as an allegory for the call of the sin of avarice. Moreover, when Odysseus does return, matters are not settled peacefully, but with violence. The killing of the suitors did not bloom into outright civil war or a civil revolt, but it almost did, and would have resulted in Odysseus killing his people, or even resulting in his own death had Athena not intervened to prevent this further bloodshed. The Odyssey is, thus, a comedy in the classical sense, where Odysseus starts from a state of grief and disorder and ends in a state of joy and order. But the Odyssey was nearly a tragedy. It was Athena that made the story otherwise. Yet even with this happy ending, tragedy still marks the killing of the suitors, and a pattern for civil violence and even civil war blooming out of the destabilizing effects of war and other chaotic elements in the world. And this is laid before our eyes in the Odyssey. The story begins not with Odysseus, but with the human privation of violence, a privation that continues, unfortunately, in the Odyssey. Thus, if you want a complete portrait of what Homer has to teach, the Iliad and the Odyssey must be read together. The Iliad teaches us what war does to its objects, as well as giving us a look into the minds of those fighting the wars, while the Odyssey shows us the casualties of war on the home front. The delicate fabric of society torn to shreds, wives without husbands and vice versa, and children without fathers and vice versa. More could be explored on this point, but I will now stop here as this has adequately acquainted us with the story and framework of the Odyssey. On the next episode, I will take a deeper look at Odysseus as a man and what philosophical argument Odysseus represents as a man, a king, a father, and a husband. Thank you for listening to this episode of In Pursuit of Truth and Happiness.